Fire Emblem is a series that is constantly changing, reusing, and abandoning its mechanics. It's anyone's guess what's gonna stick around from one game to the next. For every time you get something like the weapon triangle being introduced in FE4, which has become a series mainstay with most games having it, you'll get something like FE5 introducing fatigue, which is immediately abandoned by the series until 20 years later for one game, and then it's abandoned again. Today, I wanted to look at one such mechanic that was completely abandoned immediately after its inception: weather, being featured first and only in Fire Emblem 7. Now, in real-life medieval wars, whether or not it was raining or snowing on any particular day had a huge impact on a battle, but Fire Emblem's never really tried to make that idea stick. And the reason is probably because the one time it did, it sucked absolute balls. But why did it suck balls, and how can it suck less balls?
There is no meme. This is just a threat.
Weather appeared on exactly 3 chapters in Fire Emblem 7, and though 2 of them were rain and 1 of them was snow, they functionally did the exact same thing. They lowered the movement of every unit on the map. And therein lies the problem. If everyone's movement is lowered, nothing really changes. It doesn't matter that you are going to take a longer time to get to a village to save it from a brigand, when that brigand is also going to take a longer time to get to the village. There really isn't any change in your gameplay that you're going to do just because you're on a map with weather. Now, there is one thing to note, and that's that the player gets free of the weather before the enemy. It always ends after the enemy phase. Because of this, you can move forward and be safe from counterattack because the enemy can't reach you, and then the weather will let up and you can assault them before they would realistically be able to hit you. And that's really the only thought process that changes in regards to weather. The final weather map with snow tries to do something interesting by making it so that it's an indoor and outdoor map, so you can weave around the inside when it's snowing and not get affected by the movement penalty, but that still doesn't change the fundamental problem of lowering everyone's move doesn't change how a map operates. The only way to circumvent the movement penalty is by deploying a nomad, since they get affected by it slightly less than other units. But there's only one nomad in the entire game, so your grand strategy for defeating the weather maps is using Wrath, which really isn't that interesting of a design philosophy. So how would we go about making weather more dynamic to play with? Well, maybe introducing an enemy that actually gains movement in weather rather than loses it. Something like a water elemental or a slime, which is a bit more fantastical than Fire Emblem normally does, but hear me out. Say this slime is a very powerful enemy that's hard to kill, but its default movement is an incredibly low number like 2 or 3, so it's incredibly easy to avoid. But once the rain starts, its movement gets jacked up to 8, while yours gets lowered to the low 2 or 3. Because of this, you would need to design your army in a way that once this movement change shifts, you're prepared for it. You have to position yourself in such a way that you are prepared for the next 2 or 3 turns while the rain is happening, and that can be a very interesting thing to design around. Or, rather than just have it affect everyone equally, try to have the weather affect certain units. For example, maybe in the rain, thunder magic does more damage, and you could position enemies with very high bulk that are hard to kill in the way, and then use the rain as a sort of way to incentivize the player to go, this is when we need to attack, and then build a map around that. These are just throwing darts at a board, but it's an idea that can maybe make these maps more fun if the feature is ever brought back. Or maybe don't have the weather impact the units at all, and have it impact the map itself. Fire Emblem 6 has one of the most clever ideas for a map in my opinion, by having it take advantage of the tide. The setup for the map is that the enemy you're facing is a conqueror who doesn't know the land very well and doesn't know about the sandbars that are created from low tide, so you can completely go around their difficult army and just assault the castle from the west once the sandbar comes up. Maybe having rain either take away or add new platforms that can completely change how the map is played could be an interesting way to use weather. It's kind of like the water temple maps from the GBA games, except in a way that doesn't absolutely suck ass because you can actually prepare for when and where the maps will change. You could also make weather more interesting by having more weather than just rain and snow. Maybe you could add a strong windstorm that does something like lowers the accuracy on ranged attacks, which makes units that don't want to rely on them, like sword units, much stronger than they would be before, and could also increase the value of archers, because with their incredibly high accuracy, they're the only ones likely to hit from a range as opposed to tomahawks and spears. Maybe there could be a weather effect of a drought, which lowers the evasion of all units, and therefore forces you to rethink strategies that rely on actual tanks like generals instead of dodge tanks. I don't know why a drought would lower evasion, but I'm just workshopping here, bear with me. It also needs to not overstay its welcome. If you're throwing in weather every other map, it starts to no longer become a neat thing for you to work around and start to feel like a gimmick. I think FE7 actually had the opposite problem, where it only used it 3 times in its roughly 40 chapters. Maybe something like 5 or 6 to make it feel more impactful could also do wonders for the mechanic. I think one of the reasons I'm so fascinated by weather, even though it appeared so few times, is that Fire Emblem gimmicks rarely affect the map design. It's always the unit design and the combat. Pair up, authority stars, engaging, all of these mechanics don't change the map, they change the units. And yes, you can argue by changing how you approach the units, you change how you approach the map, and that is definitely true, but I feel like you can do more with the way that maps are designed. Fire Emblem is really one of the only strategy RPG series that even has map design. Anytime people complain about FE6 or something for having bad map design, have you ever played Shining Force or Final Fantasy Tactics? The grass isn't much greener over there. But I really think Fire Emblem could go even further beyond, and have a mechanic that consistently makes for more engaging map design. We can acknowledge that we have it pretty good, but it can be even better. But what do you think? Do you think I'm talking out of my ass and that none of these ideas are good? Do you never want to see weather ever again? Or do you think there's some other way you can make maps more engaging? Let me know in the comments. Or don't. I'm not a cop.